should be using 24% of your full CPU, so that means that you're using 100% of one side. What right now is when I do the navigation. Okay. Keep doing stuff. Okay, so sometimes stuff is just there. Okay, that should be fine. Crazy stuff is and you have to keep this on their side. So you
have to pay to get it.
This is entirely mine. Crazy can't do Areal. Huh? Why? You can see the code that's on there. It's actually someone else's framework I'm using it. Presto.js. I have no idea. Depends if that's working. No, not until that works. It was all moved.
Oh, okay. Let's shut up. We have no idea if the stream is working or not. You know.
If the stream is working, yay. If not, we're sorry.
You don't know that.
Okay. We may need some light on somewhere just because the book is here and people need to see the book. Okay. Yeah.
Turn on the sliders.
Try adjusting the slider.
Twice now I've accidentally made that joke.
Because we'll need some.
I'm glad I didn't keep doing that.
Well, it depends how well people want to actually see the book versus my presentation. So probably just have the lights on.
Just lighting as it goes.
Just keep the lights on, I think.
We can make Odo stand back there and just,
Pay no attention to the Yoda behind the curtain.
Full lights?
Yeah, just put the lights on and be fine.
That's ridiculous. I don't even know why it makes that noise.
The fan's dying. That's why
It's because it's terrible. I'm sorry. That's
Let's not test that.
Let's put you in blue, just in case.
last night you couldn't touch it.
I'm like starting to get tempted to just move the camera instead.
Is it fine? Fine?
Hmm?
Fine?
Just because of the audio.
Audio?
I'll catch the video fine, but the audio might be completely
Buzzing
blurred out
by that.
I've got.
I had a small screwdriver.
Well, we have audio coming from the screen.
Many recording things.
We're recording this in like 6 different places.
I can merge it all together, make it 3D. Someone's messaging me. Let's turn this off.
I got a camera here, so hopefully the audio will come out okay.
Is it someone saying the stream went down?
So let's just turn you off because I don't want that to happen during this. So important safety tip before I start. Important safety tip. If I go running for the door with stuff in my hands, please everyone hold your breath and get out of here without breathing. Whether you're breathing in or out, just hold your breath and leave. and head outside. And
There's an exit over here too.
yeah, exit there. There's an exit there. If I go running, please follow. You don't want to breathe lithium fumes. Not going to happen, but I do like to just say the worst case. Because the worst case is just always so hilarious. It scares people. Right, yes. Yes, this is my presentation of my Myst Book that I made. 6 years to make it. Lots of time, a lot of research gone into this, so this presentation is covering a lot of things at once that I've just learned while making all of this. So, next slide. So, quick thing, me, for people who don't know me, I don't know, everyone here should, but people on video, I'm Rium Plus or Mike Endo, come from Brisbane, Australia. Shout out to The Edge, you guys are going to thank me that I plugged you later. I drive a DeLorean, have a weapons class lightsaber, collect radioactive isotopes, and I play a really good rendition of Super Mario Brothers on my cheeks with some spoons. So, I have a habit of turning things up to 11 when I do stuff. This time I've kind of turned it up to 25. I'm kind of serious when I say that. Yeah, pretty much. So, my other stuff that I've done in the past that you may know me from, last time I was here 3 years ago, I presented my Danny clock. That's it in the finished form. Last time it just hadn't been painted. It's all finished and works, yay. I run the Riven journals. I'm sorry they don't work right now. It's a problem with updating them to PHP 4 to PHP 5. They will be working again soon when I get time. I haven't had time to do them. I also made the Riven dagger crystal key rings a while ago. Other stuff that I also make, but you know, that's just some samples of the things that I make. So the question that people often ask me when I do this is, why the heck build a Myst book? Can't you just grab any other random book and do it? It seems that's something that really casual gamers or non-gamers ask. They don't understand, you know, the whole thing. If someone's a level of person where they cosplay, they get exactly why they obsess about things like that. But it's kind of a good question. So the reason why is basically 3 reasons. A lot of people have tried to make a Myst book over time. No one's really done it to a level that I personally was happy with, and I have really high standards. People just grab a random encyclopedia, they print out a copy on it, they put a picture frame or their phone or something in. They look great, but I thought I could do a better job than everyone else. I really like a challenge, so I set myself basically the bar of how high can I set this challenge. And the basic reason is because it'd be freaking awesome if I could do it. The problem with this though is that it's really hard to find the parts to make the book. Everything involved in it is so incredibly rare. Even just the book itself and all the electronics, you can't just, you know, buy this kind of stuff. So I've had to assemble or get custom made a lot of the stuff for me. Some of the components inside it are very high-end industrial gear. Some of it's medical gear. I had to pass a background security check from one of the suppliers just to buy the parts from one of them. I had to speak to translators, use Google Translate to some suppliers in China to get some of the gear custom made for me. This is basically, it took me 6 years to make this book. Partly as I was waiting for technology to catch up, partly I was just waiting to see what's the absolute best that I could make everything. So the first question that everyone asks me when they want to know this is, what book is it? The way it works is Cyan, way back in 1990 when they first started working on Myst 91, I think it was, they just grabbed a random looking cool old book that they found probably in a bookstore, scanned it and used that as a texture reference in the games and whatever else, and that's how it came to be. What book is it? Well, here's what book it is. Harper's New Monthly Magazine, volume 54, December 1876 to May 1877. It's a 135-year-old equivalent, roughly, of a Reader's Digest. So, seriously, no one cares about this book, so they picked it up cheap, probably in a second-hand store. There's a whole series of these made, so if anyone wants to start making copies of these, getting this exact book is very difficult, but you can get a lot that are very close and look a lot like it. So if anyone wants to start doing fan creations, that's the key. Now, the problem with this, though, is that basically what happens is Harper's put out a monthly magazine, which was essentially just a bunch of cheap newspaper-bound prints of stories and articles, And every 6 months or so, various binding companies around America bound the book and just sold it as a locally bound edition of certain months and years. The thing is, there was at least, I think, 3 main companies that did the final binding, just grabbing them together and binding them, whatever else they did. They didn't use the same binding materials, they just grabbed whatever local offcuts and whatever else. This was a cheap book, so there's at least 14 major bindings that I've been able to identify. So even if you have this information, trying to find the specific exact book that Cyan used is really hard. The only way you'll find out basically is trying to get the books, buying them and comparing them and taking them apart essentially and cutting them up. Cyan's copy is really badly damaged. The only way to tell for certain if you've got an exact match is by cutting it up, but most people won't care about the color of the inside lining in the book or anything like that. It's all the outside that they care about. So just to make people really jealous now, I've bought up every single copy of this book for the past 6 years. These aren't the only ones I have. I've kept this a secret for a while just because I've needed the parts for this to try and compare and research and everything. I have some spares now, but I've cut up a lot of them to use for pieces. A lot of them are in really poor condition. The one that I've used for my Myst book is the second best condition one that I have, but I need to use that specific one for reasons I'll say later. This is basically why I kept it a secret so long, because I really needed these parts to build this book, and I didn't want people just buying it because they just wanted to have it on their shelf. I thought, even though I'm destroying the book, I can do something a bit cooler than them. At least 20% cooler. Basically, the next problem is restoring the book. This was a really cheaply made book. So the original book that I had was, actually I'll bring it out and start showing it now because I can do this. Here's the finished product. The original spine and leathering everywhere in this book is 135-year-old cheap grade leather and fabric that is worn apart. The original one, this book hadn't been used for a very long time, so it still worked as leather and still worked as a hinge, but because it was so dried and cracked out, it'd only work another 50 or so times opening and closing it until the actual book fell apart and the cover would fall off. There's nothing that you can really do about that, especially if it's an old book. You can season them regularly, but this hadn't been seasoned in the entire time that it had existed, so, you know, yes, the original is great, but functional is a bit more important than actually looking great. If you can't open the book, there's no point in having it. So what I did is I went contacting various people to see what they could do about it. So I contacted the State Museum, Queensland Museum, asked them who they use for their professional book restoration gear for antique manuscripts. They put me on to the president of the Australian Bookbinding Association, at Mr. Ian Bates at Sage Old Books. Thank you. I really annoyed him by being a bit demanding with this. It took a lot more effort than he originally anticipated. Next slide. Basically, he did a lot of work to try and restore this book for me. He cleaned everything up, he replaced the covers. He did much of the gilding work and everything that I'll get into later. He also did the cutout in the middle of the book. I really wish he'd given me a couple millimeters more. You know, even 2 millimeters would have been great, but you need physical structural support in the book. I cannot cut it back any more than that. That's the best he could do. Basically just cut a big hole in the book. I do still have other copies of the book to get the text inside, so it's not like it's completely gone forever. So there's lots of things that I learned when trying to make this book. First off, Cyan had the word Myst on the front of the book, and the Myst font that they use isn't consistent anywhere. Even Cyan themselves don't use the same font. So to give you an example, I've stripped away, it changes everywhere. This is just some examples of them. This is original Myst PC box art. This is the Myst online website advertising that they use. This is the Myst CD version that they use. This is Myst in-game book. This is Real Myst book, Real Myst box art. This is Real Myst in-game. Now, the interesting thing about this is if you look at the shape of the T just here, that doesn't match the shape of the T there. or there, or there. The serif on the S there, and there are different. The length of the Y there and there is different. And even the texture on the book itself, there's some, it's a bit hard to see on this projection, but there's some dark colors above the light patch here. They're much darker on this one, so even the texture on the book that they use themselves doesn't match up. This is just Myst. This doesn't include anything that was made by the other companies like Exile or Revelation. This doesn't include one Sign made themselves like End of Ages or Uru. This doesn't even include Riven, which also uses different fonts. Everything is different, so there's no way to really say what the Myst font and everything should be. This really matters because I need to put it on the front of the book. So I went through trying to find out how to do this, and basically I just gave up and said, I'm making this, it'll be what I call good. This is basically the font that I ended up using. Top is the actual cleaned up version from the original box art logo. If you actually look at this font in a really high resolution version, it looks very 90s dated. Funnily enough, it was made in the 90s. The serifs in particular being curved don't translate very well to the embossing. So I straightened out all the serifs and made it very close to the original. I wasn't quite a fan of the curve on the T, so I straightened them out. This made the embossing a lot clearer and made it have better definition in the shape. The embossing was done by making custom metal dies for each and every individual letter that was used to stamp both the fronts of the letters plus the spine as well. The embossing was then filled in with 24 karat gold paint, not gold leaf because gold paint lasts a bit better and has a bit better sheen and quality look to it, and why not? It's actually not that much more expensive if you're already going for gold foil. Now, one more thing. I've got many copies of this book. I'm not just turning up to 11, I'm turning up to 25. So I had spare parts of everything in case I screwed up. I did screw up a couple of times, so that is good. And that gave me access to some extra stuff. So here's a little something that I have. This is from one of the other books. This is from the same book Tyne uses as a texture reference. This is a blank white page. This is a white page. You don't get any more official than that. There's not really exactly, there's only one of these in the books generally that's still in good condition. Only in some books still have these in certain bindings, but this is from the original same print that Cyan used, so white page. So just to go a little bit more, the books are also bound with different materials and prints and whatever else. So the color's not so good under these lights. However, you can't be picky with the exact hue. This is a blue page. This was not dyed. This is the original color that it is. You can kind of, if I put it by the white one, you can kind of see it's a bit turquoise-ish blue. It's not exact. Really can't be picky, but I have a blue page as well. So for everyone who loves Cirrus, the inside of the book is red. So full trifecta of all 3 pages. Had to do that. So they're all originals, they're all from the correct book. Now here comes the interesting part. I didn't get time to finish everything on this book, so it's a little picky to do some of this stuff. So I'm gonna turn this on and we'll see how it goes. Now I'm gonna say this will crash. The software is not stable. The hardware is reasonably good, but the software has problems in it. I didn't have time to fix all the software. I'm sorry, you know, I'm only human. So to turn on the book, I'm gonna turn on this book and then continue the presentation. Basically, I do as much as I can in this book until it crashes, go back to the presentation, and just alternate until I'm done with everything. If it crashes, you get to see what it looks like on a Myst Book blue screens and goes through ScanDisk. So let's just get this going. It's a little picky to get this turned on, and there's no way I can speed this up, I'm sorry. Everyone be prepared to run if I screw up. So I apply the power like this. There's no actual power switch anywhere. It's all a little picky getting it all to fit and work. So much so I use tweezers to manually bridge the electrical connections to turn it on. I didn't have time for a power switch. But if you can see the faint light up there, if this is all gonna work, there we are. Push you in there. Signals received. And here's what a Myst Book's like booting Windows XP. Yes, it's running Windows XP is what it's running. I'll go through all the hardware details in a moment. It takes a little bit to boot up. All the data is coming loaded from a 32 gig compact flash card emulating the hard drive. So it's a little picky with the way it works. Let me just grab some other stuff. As it boots up. Okay, while that loads, you want to go to the next slide, and I'll just go to the next part. Okay, so inside this book is an entire desktop computer. The difference between a desktop computer and like a phone is phones normally use different chips. They normally are running on the ARM chipset instructions now. This is running on the full x86 architecture, which means it is a desktop computer. The smallest desktop computers you can kind of get are like some tablets are x86, but not like the iPad or anything. You can also get netbooks like this one to give you a size comparison. Don't forget there's a big border all around the computer in this border of the pages in this. You can kind of see the comparison in size. This is smaller than even this. And everything is inside it. So to make it all fit is kind of, to say it's a squeeze is an understatement. 2 millimeters was absolutely huge. If I had 1 millimeter, that was a lot of room. It's essentially designed as a full 3-dimensional circuitry layout in here that I've had to hand assemble. So it's probably booted up by now. Here we are. So it's going to be kind of hard to see this on the screen over there since it's a tiny little thing. So on here, there's all sorts of things that I can run. I have a stylus somewhere, I don't know where I put it. So there's various software that is on here. If you just want something a little bit more stereotypical, touchscreen's playing up, I probably want the cable on it. Yes, I have. As I said, I had to hand solder a lot of the stuff in here, and signal integrity on hand soldered things isn't the best, so USB cables are a little bit picky, and I may have to reboot it. If that fails, I just go on with the talk. I have videos of it working and everything if all else fails. Nope, I'm gonna have to reboot it. It's a little picky. So to reboot it, I grab my trusty tweezers and manually short out the jumper connection. And if anyone faintly heard that, the PC speaker just went beep. I will get to that later. It's on the slide. There's a whole section on that. So that's booking. So to try and shrink everything down, basically you have to make everything as small as physically possible. That's a lot smaller than a lot of people are used to. So a desktop power supply computer, if you've ever seen them, they're normally a big brick. That's my power supply. It's this tiny little thing that is 4 layers of double-sided circuitry. That does all the regulation from the battery to the various voltages that the motherboard needs. Over here is a power supply cable for the speaker amplifier. That still wasn't short enough, and I had to cut it back more because I didn't have space to even loop the cable around a little bit. There's a USB cable, the one that I had to hand solder. It's been shortened down to around 8 inches or so, 20 centimeters. I didn't even have enough space to make the corner turn in a tight enough radius, so I think it's working. Let me just check. Maybe it's working. Let's find out. It was, and now it stopped. Oh, now it's going. Okay. Maybe this isn't like being held up, which would be hilarious. There we are. So, I'm just using these because I don't want to use my finger. I don't want to get oils on the finger. So there's all sorts of software that's put on this book. I'm going to start with just this one, which is a video that I have loaded up on there. That's a streaming video of the Real Myst blinking panel. This does actually run Real Myst. You can play Real Myst on this, but that's just a video that I like to use as a demonstration just to start it up. It's nice and quick.
Ryan, just scooch over this way so we can get a picture for the official feed. Because the feed can't see
Okay.
anything you're doing.
This way? This way? How far this way?
Come here.
How far this way? This way? Can you see it still?
Ah, it's so bright.
Yes, the screen is bright. It's 220 lumens per square meter thing. The video's going to end in a moment.
There it went.
So that's just an example of that. Now, the main goal that I had for this book was to have it actually be able to run Myst. So that was the benchmark that I used, but I didn't want to run an emulated version. I didn't want to run ScumVM. I wanted to run the original native binary file. So this is the original edition of Myst Masterpiece Edition. Yo, dog, I heard you like linking. So this is, as you can see, the Myst Book. In the Myst Book, you can actually, the speakers blew at the last moment, so unfortunately there are two speakers hidden here and here inside that sounded fantastic. The cheap Chinese wiring in this power amplifier blew them, so they don't work anymore, and my speakers blew. It blew the amplifier, it blew the 5-volt power rail and power supply, and it blew the sound card on the motherboard. So I didn't have time to fix that. The speaker's still in there and work, just everything else is blown. So this is Myst. This is actually playable. As one does. Full game of Myst Masterpiece Edition. Now I won't go through all of it, but yes, it's Myst.
Quick, do a speed run.
Speed run it in 23 minutes. What's the speed run record, a minute?
Depends on whether you're cheating.
Don't save. So there's all sorts of other software that I can show you on here. Okay, some of the software, I can get into it, but I didn't program a way to get out of it because there's no escape key, and I didn't program the override on the touchscreen. So, quick show of hands. This essentially has all of the Myst software on here. Who wants to see Rium? Who wants to see Real Myst? Anyone? I can go through more than one of these games, so keep the show of hands on this. Who wants to see Exile? Revelation? Uru doesn't go in the cavern. I don't have a wireless card in here, so sorry, it can't go in the cavern. What's the other one? End of Ages? Anyone? Okay, so I'm going to load up Rium. Now, I'll say this one in advance. Rium had a problem with the sound card. It was working, but it turns out if you don't have a sound card installed on your computer, Rium runs, but you can't actually click anywhere and then it crashes straight away. So I can play the intro video of Rium, if that's what you want to see, and then it's going to crash. But some people, I think people will like that. It tends to be a favorite. So I'll just have this here while I keep talking about the rest of it. Sometimes Rium doesn't always execute again. It's the Indio 3 codec, I think it was, they used in Rium with QuickTime 3 originally. It's the original DVD edition of Rium being run on this, not one of the later versions. I think, I can't remember which one I ended up installing. Rium doesn't always want to work. There we go. That's basically the monitor just changing the refresh rate. It does that when you load almost any game. So start new game. I'll just leave this going for people to watch while I talk. Oh, it's one of the later ones. Oh well. It's still a deep. I'm sorry. So shrinking the computer. The touchscreen cable. I couldn't actually get the cable even around the tight bends that I needed to make on this. So I cut back all the insulation on the cable. Normally it goes to around there. It was trimmed all the way back to there just so I can make it do a tighter radius on the bend. The video cable signal, normally video cables are around that big. This is a tiny little male-to-male adapter plug to convert from one signal to the other. And the important thing is I didn't have enough space for that. So I had to manually hand solder my own VGA cables to get that working. Hey look, it's dangerous. So next slide. So the motherboard that I used in this one, this is basically the heart of this. This is a 10 centimeter by 10 centimeter, which is around 4.8 inches, 4.7 inches in diameter. This is an x86 system running Windows XP, so there's no Android, there's no iOS, there's no Linux running Scum VM on this even. This is a full desktop computer. The CPU is actually the smaller of the two heat sinks. I had to get this one from the interesting supplier. This is tiny. This is the only way I could make this fit. You're still going. So basically this is everything you need in a desktop computer just shrunk down physically as max as possible. If anyone's seen Intel just recently announced their NUC computers a month ago at 9 centimeters in diameter, just announced as demo only, won't be available until the end of the year, gonna be expensive, all this stuff. I had this in my hand and took this photo in February. It takes laptop RAM, compact flash card to boot from it. It's basically everything on a desktop computer, just rather than being desktop, it's shrunk down as much as physically possible. It's designed for embedded systems, high altitude balloons, and medical gear where they need absolute smallest space possible. Potentially military gear, they have a higher grade one that will do military certification. This isn't that one because they add an extra zero onto the price. It's an incredibly low power chip inside it. The graphics card is actually DirectX 9 capable graphics on it. And the hilarious part is this is actually faster than my netbook. It's got a decent amount of power into this thing. So it's an Intel based chip running the Atom, I can't remember the model number off the top of my head, but you know, it's a MacBook. Next slide. Displaying everything. This is trickier than it sounds. You can't just buy a display that's going to suit something like this. The paper is here, the display needs to be here, so you can't just buy a normal monitor and fit it in there. GPS or something like that, you can't get it exact, and I had really high requirements for this. Now, I can't remember if it crashes before or after Cho appears. Oh, there we go. Crashes after Cho appears and the game actually starts, because there's an audio problem at the end of that. It's, anyone who's tried running Rium on the newer versions probably had the same issue where it crashes the same spot. It's because of the sound card issue and drivers, and without a sound card you can't exactly get that working. So to get the display working, I wanted the absolute best you possibly can. My requirements for this was original Myst, everything else had to run, but it had to be perfect for Myst. So the display is a 640 by 480, 4.9 inch screen at 16.7 million colors. You have no idea how restricted that actually is. Most screens you get like that size. There are older ones which are 480 by 272, designed for GPS systems or whatever else. The next one goes up to 800 by 480. That's not the right aspect ratio. If it's slightly too big or slightly too small, it won't fit, so it has to be exactly like that. There's only around 3 monitor panels ever made that actually would fit this. I could only get a hold of one of them, and it looks fantastic, as you can see. So basically you end up with full 1:1 native pixel resolution, full screen on original Myst, no blurring, no smoothing, no resizing. It looks as crisp as it possibly can be. The actual display hardware behind it, the driver board for it, natively translates the resolution to the LCD as they all do. That's capable of up to 2048 by 1536 and scaling down. So if you wanted, for some reason, you can run Real Myst at a really high resolution and get really good looking graphics as it's scaled down for that, or you can run at native resolution and get it as crisp as possible. Let me just scroll down. The touch screen to go in front of it, you can't exactly get touch screens for some of these sizes perfectly. A lot of times there is a matching one. This one didn't have a matching one, so this is where I had to talk to the supplier in China, and that's probably where it's crashed. Yes, I'm just going to reboot this so I can do the next thing in a moment. And then I'll get back to that. Trusty tweezers. There we go. And I bet now that one's going to have to do a scan disk. Beep. The PC speaker works. I was tempted to write a driver to adapt to the PC speaker so you could hear the little beepy antique sounding music on it, but I didn't get around to it. So the display, the touchscreen display on it is a 2048 by 2048 resolution touch display with 40 milliseconds of lag on it. Basically, it was custom made for me in China. The glass was custom ground that I had to discuss with the manufacturers for that. It's a 4-wire resistive panel, 160 samples a second, 40 milliseconds of input lag. Not that that matters much to anyone here, but just there's the numbers for anyone in the future. It fits the display perfectly. There was a slight little problem with it being 0.5 millimeter off, but otherwise it's basically perfect. Ooh, we didn't do a scan disk. Perfect. So I'm going to run the next one on here, just because I can, while this is working. Tweezers. Here they are. So I'm going to load up Skip to End of Ages. That's the most technically demanding game that they've released, to show you just that this actually has some power in it. There is a problem with the touchscreen not always working perfectly in End of Ages. It's a little picky to get it to navigate at first, just because of the way it works. I'll get through it anyway. So the next one is trying to power this book. You can't just power this kind of thing with normal AA batteries or even a normal rechargeable battery. I basically went to see what's the absolute, hey, sign logo thing, the absolute maximum power density that I could possibly get in the physically smallest possible space. The best batteries that you can currently get, if money is not an object because you're only buying a small one, are not the kind that they actually use in electric cars. Those, because you're buying so much, the cost really matters. Because this is such a relatively small one, you can actually get much more bang for your buck with other options. This is a lithium-ion polymer battery that's designed for remote-controlled planes, actually. The reason why is because they need a very high output amperage for a very short time, very small, as light as possible, and the big thing is they don't so much worry about protection or whatever else. They sacrifice everything to get those performance values correct, because if the plane crashes, it's going to basically explode anyway, so it doesn't matter. So every gram counts. So the cell inside this is a 3-cell lithium battery at 11.7 volts as the nominal ones, 2100 milliamp hours, 23 watt hours, 30C discharge current, but the impressive thing is its peak sustained output is 60 amps of juice. For anyone who knows electrical engineering, you're probably going, what? That's incredibly high just for a tiny little battery like this. There's no protection on the outside. It is the raw pouches. They expand and contract slightly as charging and discharging because of that. You do not squeeze one, you do not puncture one. If you do, there's a lithium fire that's going to happen and we all have to leave. This is kind of scary because it's put inside an antique 135-year-old book that's been glued together next to electronics generating heat that were hand soldered. So that's why I say be careful with that. So I'm just going to get this in game, or at least get the game started. It's a little picky. It can be very picky to get this working. Okay, I'll go through the whole video on this one just because. view. So, Myst 5 intro video. Do you want to go to the next slide? The power supply on the book that's matched to the batteries can actually go up to 135 watts sustained. The book itself consumes around 12 watts, I estimate. I haven't actually measured that. But the big problem with this is basically the heat. There's no fans in this book. Everything that you saw, like the motherboard, is entirely passively cooled. This is a bit of a problem, but everything is basically, there's no way to deal with this heat. The only way to deal with it is to not generate it. So that's why everything is the absolute lowest power chips you physically can buy. They do not make any better than that. The power supply's efficiency is 94%. The CPU and the graphics card are very low power versions that Intel don't even normally include on their laptops. But even still, there's only so much you can do. So I checked out through the heat signature of the book with a thermal camera I have access to at work. This is the motherboard after running 90 minutes of a stress test. It's in Celsius. Sorry, Imperial people, but science needs metric systems. Can't do it. So as an example of the front and back look, you can see the CPU and the GPU. The peak power supply was some of the power converters that peaked at 48 degrees. Celsius, Fahrenheit, I think, just off the top of my head, that's like 130 Fahrenheit. Given that a normal computer runs at 60 to 80 degrees, that's incredibly cold, and that's after 90 minutes of a benchmark. There's the back, you can see the compact flash card just there is very cold. The RAM is basically the same color as everything else. And basically the temperature isn't so much in the CPU or the GPU, it just gets conducted throughout the entire rest of the motherboard. Going from there, it gets conducted to the entire rest of the book and just conducts out of the book. There's no other way really to cool this without trying to drill holes in a fan, and I'm not doing that. I wanted it to be an actual book, still look like a book. Next one. Oh, I didn't want number to sound there. 48 Celsius is 118 Fahrenheit, so you know that's quite reasonable. The speakers on the book. The speakers were going to be fantastic. I've got some video of showing the sound of the speakers themselves. These were speakers that I bought, like this, designed to be as small as physically possible, but still sound good. You can get smaller ones like they have in birthday cards, but they don't sound good. So I needed something that was still reasonable. These sound, when they worked, they sound almost perfect. This is the front of the book when it still had the styrene cover on the front before I put the paper on. There's perforated holes here and here, it's kind of hard to see, that the speakers are within. That's what it looks like from the back. This is the display as well. Basically what happens is there's paper and there's a layer of styrene with holes and then speakers. The speakers were positioned such that they had a slight little gap, but not a very large gap between them, the cones and the styrene. The thing that I had planned and half working before it shorted out is they weren't a full enough distance from the actual styrene. The reason for this is because if you hit a certain volume with a certain frequency, it will reverberate enough to actually start contacting the styrene and create distortion and noise. You really don't normally want that with speakers, but what I was going to do is set the volume to the correct level, and lower frequencies will hit it first, and the linking sound happens to have some very lower frequencies at the bottom. So set the volume to the correct version. When you touch the screen to link in one of the games, it would have reverberated the speakers just enough to start contacting the front of the styrene, which would have vibrated the front. So when you touch the book to link, you would have felt a tingle and a vibration go up your hand. Like they describe it in the book. But it didn't work. The problem was cheap, dodgy Chinese wiring on the amplifier wire that I showed you earlier. It blew everything else. The wires were actually outside the insulation when I stripped it back and plugged it in. Magic smoke escape, there's nothing I can do. Oh, it's working. Okay. So, to give an idea on the computing power inside this book, this is the best game to give as a demonstration for that. Let me just get this working. Okay. Which one is it? There we are. So, Barra will run away as they do because they're scared of everything.
Wow.
So this has got, I'm not serious when I say it's got more power than my netbook. This actually runs everything quite reasonably. Where am I going? Somewhere. song goes. So it's got enough power to play even End of Ages. So it plays all of the Myst games and it plays them all perfectly. Now I'm going to reset this again. I'm going to have to do the hard reset just because I need to show you the next part of it and you can have it working for that. Trusty tweezers on the electrical connections again. Does it show I've done this many times? Okay, it's booting again. It may have to do a scan disk. I'd love for it to do a scan disk so you can see it. I thought it would be crashing all the time. Sometimes it does, which is hilarious because then you see a Myst Book doing a scan disk on a blue screen. So the next thing is, next slide. Trying to assemble this all. That's basically the inside of the book. There's no space for absolutely anything else to add into there. It's physically as tight as it possibly can be. So to give an example, this is without the motherboard put in. The motherboard ends up being hardwired into the power supply down here where the battery goes there. Basically, if you look just there, or what is there, the order of things in the book is the book's cover, there's some first pages, there's the main cover page, there's some styrene, there's a plastic covering, there's the glass touchscreen, there's the aluminium and LCD panels, there's some electrical tape, there's some superglue, more electrical tape, there's the styrene in the middle of the electrical tape, there's the display driver board, there's the display driver board's other PCB, there's some insulating paper with aluminium foil. Because everything is being so squished together, the only way I can do this is you start actually having electrical interference between all the appliances. Then on top of that is the actual motherboard's power cables, then the motherboard itself, and then the end of the book. That's just how dense this thing is with all the electronics. There's really not much space for anything else. It's so dense basically that the heat sinks on the motherboard are here and here. There's another power connector and adapter that goes there. And the capacitors of the power supply have to be fitted inside, in between the holes of the heatsink and the power connector, just to slot it in there to get the extra 2 millimeters that I need to make it all fit. But it does actually all fit in there. So I should do a quick rundown of the software that's actually installed on here. I have a couple of surprises on this. Installed on this right now are Myst Masterpiece Edition, Real Myst, Riven DVD Edition, Mystery Exile, Myst Full Revelation, Ages Beyond Myst Complete, the Path of the Shell expansion, because not Complete Chronicles, because it has a bit more content in it, not much but something. Myst 5 End of Ages, the Manhole Masterpiece Edition, and Crow Thistle, the Book of Atris text copy, Book of Atris audio CD, and some flyby videos. There's one extra little thing that I have on this as a surprise. It works on this. I'm going to actually show you on my laptop instead. I said I run the Riven journals earlier. They were promotional things made by Riven way back in Riven 97, 98 or so. There was an extra one that they also made. I went and contacted the original creators of the Riven journals to see what I could get. And Jean-Paul Leonard, one of the guys, I think it was him, can't remember, actually had some extra content, and he gave it to me. Said, I can't get this running. If you can do anything with these files, you're welcome to them. I've sat on this for a while just because I've been trying to get it running, and I can't release them because I've got them running myself, but it required such modifications to my computer that I'm not sure even releasing them would be any use to anyone. But there was an extra game that they created in 1998 called Riven Elementary. And some people may remember this, probably most people have forgotten about this. Basically what this was, is this was a game created to tie in with the release of Riven in 1998. Antique thing, a Shockwave production. Before it was known as Adobe Shockwave, back when it was passed between many owners, it was originally, the first editions was known as Shockrave. So it took quite a bit of effort to get this running on a modern computer with modern Shockwave install files. That's why I haven't released it. But basically, I'll just turn the volume up so people can hear this. I haven't got everything restored on this, but I've got parts of it restored. And what essentially it is there would have been a copy of the WARC counting numbers game in Rium as the background of this. There's two WARC people there, and there's the same little thing that you press and it goes through and shows you the dunny numbers and drops the poor people towards the WARCs. But on the right hand side there is some dunny numbers and symbols. So depending on how good your dunny is, let's see how mine is under pressure. 15 squiggly thing 3 5. 15 divided by 3 is 5. That's the dunny symbol for divide. That's been forgotten about this whole time. Technically, Rawa said, like the Riven journals, it's not canon. It's only just something that they made up. But they've never released anything to contradict it ever, and they've never released those symbols. So we have 9 divided by 3 is 3. So you just play the game like that. And it has the dunny symbols for plus, minus, times, and divide. If I can get a copy working, I will upload it, but until then, you're welcome to play it on my computer. Just, I have a very heavily destroyed version of Internet Explorer running it because I don't care about Internet Explorer. So that's basically the only way I can get it running. If I can do something, I will. That's the best I can get right now. Pretty much that's it. If there's any questions on this book, any questions? Yes.
I was worried to start with, and now I'm certainly worried. Can't quite figure out how far you're going with this thing. If Rium touches that page, will it go to the Brisbane age, and does he have another
Only Yusha can link to the same place in the same age. Sorry. Yeah, any other questions? Yes.
How thick is the book?
How thick? I don't know, it looks like
It's that thick.
2 inches, that's how thick it is. It's slightly heavier than the original one just because of the electronics in it. And it's really hard to take photos of this that don't look photoshopped on the internet. So there's it running. There's the electronics in the background. There's it running again. You've all seen it, you're all witnesses to say that yes, this is actually real, because all photos of this basically just look like I just dropped, copy and paste a Photoshop thing into it. Yes, Heidi.
So with all the technology in there and being made out of paper, what are the odds of it catching on fire?
You want to come feel how hot the book is on the back?
Thank you.
Yeah. You tell me how hot the book is on the back.
Not very hot.
It's a little warm. It's not that warm, basically. The heat conducts out of the book fairly well, not that well. Yes?
How long does the battery last?
I've never tested. I've only ever run it for around 20-30 minutes or so. I'm not sure, I don't know. It probably won't last hours, but you know, it's something. It's the best you physically can get with today's technology. Batteries may get better in 10 years' time, but for now, that's basically it. Yes?
I don't know if you're comfortable with this information, but how much would you say the whole thing is worth?
Yeah, that's right.
How much it cost me to make this one? How much to make another one? Because when I bought this, I bought multiple copies of everything. Now, a lot of the parts are going to be hard to buy another ones for. You can't buy all of them again. For this one, a rough figure, I think it's somewhere around $1,500 to $2,000 or so for this book. Basically, you can't get anything better than this. That's why I tried to do it, because I actually had the original book and everything. I wanted to go as best as I could. Anything else? Yes.
Can you show us the Myst Island flyby?
Yes, I can.
Tell them about the Easter egg.
Oh, yeah.
Start up.
It doesn't work because the sound doesn't work, but when you start it up normally, this video automatically plays of Beatrice just writing, and when you just turn on the book, and he says up and says, "Who the devil are you?" If the speakers are working, it'd be much funnier, but that's the video that plays on auto startup. Thank you for reminding me. Myst Flyby, the original Myst Masterpiece Edition, because it has slightly higher resolution. Figured I might as well do that one. There you go.
Stream might have questions.
Oh yeah, stream. What's the stream
streamers
saying?
have been clamoring for like. Because the stream can't actually see you at all. All they see is the.
So here?
That's because the cable is long enough to get
Or is that just a video?
Yeah, well, this is I like
What's
hooked
this
up
one?
I hooked up a Google Hangout and was
Oh,
telling people
Hangout.
that that's
Is
where it
everyone
is.
actually in there?
I don't know yet.
I know.
I started.
It says off air.
Oh.
Any stream questions? Don't cross the streams.
basically.
How much it weighs?
Yes.
How much it weighs? I'm not sure. I haven't actually measured that. I didn't have time to measure it. It's probably around 5 pounds or so. I don't know. What do you think it weighs?
More than your netbook?
I don't know weight or not.
Yeah.
Slightly more than netbook, not much more. Any other questions?
They want to see Riven Elementary.
You want to see Riven Elementary? What's the best way to do this? Where's the camera for the...
I can turn the camera on.
Turn the camera on. I can show that. Was there any other questions on the stream before we do that?
I think that's it. There might be something from a long time ago. Tell them to. You have the mic.
I don't know. Ask me things, peons.
Tanith, looking at the stream, I thought I saw a question asking me if like you could see the lightning work in games. Rose?
I miss Tangent. He would do this stuff in the presentation.
All these slides will be uploaded when I get a chance. They're all done in HTML5 to go on my website. So anyone can view these slides, and I've got videos of it working as well. So long as you're using a new version of Chrome or Firefox or Safari, has to be a new version of all three because HTML5 WebGL. Yeah. Forget Internet Explorer, it doesn't even work.
They say you should put an HDMI cable on it so you can watch TV on the book.
An HDMI cable on the book. I don't have room for an HDMI cable. Where would I put it?
So someone has a question. They
Oh.
don't say they have to type it.
They're not pink, I
Ask
swear.
it.
Pink walls, they're
They're maroon.
I don't know, I'm colorblind.
They're, yeah.
Have I ever visited the shores of Zimbabwe? No, I have not. Well, I think that's it.
I think that's it.
That's it? Okay.
Type now.
So I'm going to turn this off just because I'm nervous about leaving this on. If anyone wants to grab a photo up close before I
People on
do
the
that.
stream won't actually see the book.
Yeah,
Can I just
they
can they see it somewhere?
Yeah.
over here.
Either one.
Over there?
Yeah. And it's recording.
So here's the
Can they see that
I
pen? Because I can't. I
Myst
can't.
flyby video. I don't know how that's very low resolution, but you can
Yeah,
see
it's
that that's.
sorry.
If I was photoshopping this, I wouldn't bother photoshopping so low quality.
It's just.
Oh.
So that's
What?
the front one.
they say there's nothing in the G plus stream.
It's on air.
It says on there. It should be. It should say there's a hangout.
Do you want to just show it? There's a camera.
Yeah. Then do that if it's working.
Now there is.
Run.
Lag. Oh,
So now we go here, back this way.
wait.
So most thumb it says.
So they're probably talking about my camera. Show it over here too, so they stop.
This
showing.
way?
Is there a camera over here?
Yes.
Can I see that screen so I know what I'm showing? Oh, that little one down there. Myst Book. Where's my tweezers?
I'll move.
I don't want to get fingerprints on the screen.
What are they hiding?
Myst Flyby video?
On the, there's a.
Tissue paper?
Yeah, it's tissue paper. I've just had it in the book just to protect it.